We've got a couple of Champions League games left to play, Melly, but for all intents and purposes, we're out.
We're out, and it's a bit harsh, but we didn't get the results, and other teams did. We look at it and look at these games, and I think we should have got more out of it. We maybe speculated in the last couple of weeks that will we rue that Shakhtar away game, and we do. We really do. We should have got 3 points there. We created more than enough chances to get it, and we simply failed to, and it's put us under pressure. And look, we've went out to Leipzig and get beaten both games, and it's meant we've went out. Slim chance of getting the Europa League, but I do think it's pretty slim now because we have to get something in Madrid. But I think, again, after the game, I'm like, right, okay, let's try and take the emotion out. I still think we played quite well, but we just got done by a team that is very, very good and very effective at what they do. Could Celtic have done things better? Yes, but was it a decent performance? I still think it was.
It took until Rangers getting absolutely smashed into the dirt for people in the Scottish media to suddenly come around to the idea that the Champions League is difficult, Stephen. But it's something that we've been saying on this podcast for a wee while, that although Celtic haven't been ideal and there's been some question marks around particular players' performances, I think I broadly agree with the manager's approach. I broadly agree with the manager's comments that at no point did we look out of place in the tournament, like Rangers have at almost every opportunity in here. We've not looked out of place. We've made chances. We've just not been clinical enough. We've just not passed them up. Maybe we've just lacked a wee bit of quality in the Champions League. You know, there is a big gap between where the domestic stuff sits to where the Champions League stuff sits. So it is possible for players to be
get that big. That's bigger.
Yeah, we'll keep it short. Keep it short. So it is possible for players to be, you know, above the domestic stuff, but not quite in the Champions League. And I think that's maybe something that we need to reflect upon a wee bit about which players thrived, which players didn't, which players passed, which players didn't. But overall, I'm torn, Stephen, because I said at the very start of this tournament, I want Ange to approach it the way he wants to approach it, the way he's going to approach it. This is the test and I want to see it. But at the same time, I said I didn't want to be sitting here midway through the tournament already out saying, oh, by golly gosh, didn't we play well? And I kind of like, part of me feels like that, but part of me also doesn't feel like that. And I think part of me also didn't realise at the beginning of the tournament how difficult this was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, I think all of us maybe underestimated the opponents. We certainly underestimated Shakhtar, who Melly's sitting there saying we should have beaten them, yes, but they've also taken points off everybody, including Real Madrid. Shakhtar have done well. So there's a lot going on, but I think overall I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed that we didn't qualify. But having watched the games and seen the quality of the opposition, I can understand why we're in that position.
Are you disappointed but not angry?
I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed more with myself for underestimating the competition that we were in. And this is, but there's no shame in that, is there, Stephen? Because this is the whole purpose of this whole tournament was to see how we stacked up in the Champions League, and this is an honest assessment of it. We just fell short.
I think you've summed up the various emotions of it quite well there.
Thank you.
It wouldn't hurt me to tell you more often. I think you've done quite well with that. Of course it's disappointing, of course it is. You don't want to go out after 4 games and fairly comprehensively out with 1 point. Should have done better, should have taken more chances. But I'm struggling to drum up the excitement about it all that other people seem to have, but just no good enough and all that.
I mean, the righteous indignation.
That's exactly it. Yeah, righteous indignation about going out at this stage. It is totally different. I think we've had this discussion a number of times, and I'm conscious of just repeating myself, but it's very difficult because we've played the same opposition twice in a row, and it's played out very, very similarly. We just didn't take chances, and then we're beaten.
And if you want to hear our thoughts on those individual games, not a cheap plug for the Patreon, but we don't really discuss the to's and fro's of the individual games much on the flagship podcast. But if you want to hear individual thoughts on those games, patreon.com/20minutetims.
Yeah, and I was at the game with Leipzig, and someone asked us, we were approached at half-time by a listener who said he was just a fan telling us what a superb job we're doing at half-time. And he asked us...
This is the first time hearing about this, by the way.
What do you think of the game so far?
Did you not ask for me, no?
Well, it was implied. He looked crestfallen that all of us weren't there.
Yeah, very good.
And I asked what I thought of the game, and I was like, do you know what? I don't know, because it's so intense. You barely get a second to breathe in the Champions League to take it in. At one point during that game, when it was still nothing each, I found myself thinking, look, I'd rather either be 3-0 up or 3-0 down now, just to alleviate the pressure, because one way or another it's going to play out the way it will.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd rather be 3-0 up than 3-0 down.
Correct.
But at one point, I thought it's so intense that I just want the game to be decided in some way or other, because it's just constant. We're not used to it in domestic football. So it's disappointing to go out. Of course it is. But at the same time, if we treat it as a test to see whether we are a Champions League ready club, at the moment we are not. We've not qualified for the thing for years, and the debate was always, but we're a Champions League team and we're having to play in the Europa League. I don't think that's the case. I think we can be proud of how Celtic went about it.
Yep.
Played football, took the games to these teams, and just came short, because the alternative is, you look, you've already mentioned it, you look across the city, you could just go in there and meekly try and play for draws and still lose, convincingly lose every single game. I'm not saying that's what Celtic would have done, but it's quite often, if you take that approach, is what will happen against teams that are much better than you. Celtic were deserving of more points than they got based on the level of performance, in my opinion. But it doesn't really count for much, because we are out and we're kind of running out of games. I'm reluctant to now look at the Europa League, because the whole time in this Champions League campaign we've been like, right, we've got this game, we've got the 2 home games ahead of us, we need to really target those. Right, we've lost these couple, so we've got this ahead of us, we need Real Madrid to keep winning in order to qualify, but we need to do this. So slowly the games have just been ticking away and we're running out of options. Now the focus goes to the Europa League and we're just running out of games in order to qualify for that as well. It'll be a great bonus, but it's all...
What do we need to do to get in the Europa League? Because I've kind of lost track.
Certainly win a game.
Yeah.
At least 4 points.
Yeah,
at least 4. And hope someone else does us a favour,
including in the Bernabeu as well. So we need to take something from the Bernabeu. So it doesn't look great, but it's overall deflating to go out at this stage, because the most disappointing thing about it is not that Celtic aren't as good as these teams, it's just that could have had so much more had things fallen our way. And it's not just luck. There's quality in there as well. These are good teams, and they made that count by taking chances that Celtic weren't. Quite often these teams will create no more chances than Celtic will, but the difference is they take them. Yeah. They're clinical, they're lethal. So it's overall a wee bit flat. Mixed emotions for it, but I'm not as angry about it as other people are.
No, I'm not angry. I'm just a wee bit should have done a bit better. And I mean that because I think Celtic, what we said, like, can we compete in this tournament, not being in it for so long, playing this style of football? And I think we have. I think we really have competed, but we just haven't got the breaks that we'd maybe hope to get. And it maybe show my age, I don't know if it still works like this, but no, that way you go into 5th year and you do like higher and you just miss out on passing. Yeah. And then you go, right, see, next year I really think I can do it, because I think Celtic next year will gain so much from this and can go forward and maybe get those breaks that they weren't getting this year, because we've seen in the Hibs game, like, Celtic didn't do anything different, but it seemed to be things fell for us and we scored 6 goals. Could we not have maybe scored 3 or 4 in that one and got 1 or 2 in the champ?
Spread the goals in.
18 years later, Melly's still trying to pass 5th year, by the way. So good luck next year. There's always next time.
The year 2040 Celtic will qualify from the group. I think it's just one of those ones that we were playing in the big boy league and we were learning on how to grow up as we were doing it. So it was very difficult, and I don't think there's anything I can pinpoint to Celtic performances and go, we should have done this apart from score goals, because we created the chances. There was only the one Joe Hart goal that I think was completely avoidable. There's no laughable Celtic in Europe goals apart from that one. I think we've competed, we've created chances, we've just maybe not got what we deserved. And usually you say you make your own luck, like you mentioned, Stephen, but I don't feel Celtic got that.
I mean, you're talking about this learning, and this is something that I discussed as well. I think, we're learning the Champions League. I don't necessarily know if 1, it should, or 2, it should be allowed, to run through you don't play a whole Champions League tournament and go, right, okay, well, we learned for that one, so maybe next year's our assault. I think specifically with the back-to-back Leipzig games, within at least 3, you know what you're up to. But the Real Madrid, the Shakhtar, and the back-to-back Leipzig games, after the first leg and the return, you should know what you're up to. So I don't know if I'm going to extend the learning on the job thing for the whole tournament. But to sort of carry on the school analogy that you used there, Melly, I think some of the players have got pass marks, and some of the players have got
caught smoking behind the bins.
Caught smoking. They've got resets or they've out and out failed. And I think some of the big hitters,
some have dogged it.
Some have dogged it. Basically, I think our problem is a lot of the big hitters, they've not got pass marks. And I think sometimes particularly when we're doing the podcast, you don't want to like upset people by being too bold in your opinion. But sometimes things are black and white. And if I think I look at the big hitters that we wanted to excel in the Champions League, Jota, fail. I mean, he scored a goal, maybe fail, maybe reset. Matt O'Reilly's passed though. Kyogo, fail. Abada, fail. Maeda, fail. But there's been players like Greg Taylor who's passed. Carter Vickers passed, top of the class, flying colours. Greg Taylor, Matt O'Reilly, Callum McGregor, all these guys have passed. There's guys that have not really shown up for it, like Juranovic and all that. But I think a lot of our big hitters have failed this test, this tournament.
Yeah, well, what you're saying about learning on the job, like, it's not as if you play the game and then go, right, see everything I just learned in that game, I'll bring it on. What it is you learn over these games, right, this is a level I have to get to, so now I need to go out and work to get to that level. I don't think you can do it week to week and go, right, he did that sort of movement, I'll do that now and that's me. But I think, like, it's the forward-thinking players that are maybe the ones that aren't getting the pass marks, and that's because you're up against better defenders, sharper defenders, you're up against better goalkeepers than that. And look,
I'm not saying, I know there's mitigating circumstances to quote Neil Lennon. I know that exists, but what I'm saying is they've only got one choice, pass or fail, and some of them have failed at this level. Carter Vickers, for example, he's up against much better strikers than he is, much better attackers than he is. Matt O'Reilly's getting much less time on the ball. Every individual player has got brand new, more difficult challenges. Some of them rose it, some of them didn't.
Yeah, but Celtic, Cameron Carter Vickers did well, but Celtic are still conceding basically 2 goals a game in every game, aren't they? So, like, where do you draw the line there? The forwards have found it difficult to finish their chances, but like, where do we go from there? Are Celtic going to go out and get a better player than Jota or Kyogo? I just don't think it exists for Celtic. So what do we try and do? We try and improve on the players we've got. Do you think we can get a better player than
Look, I don't want to get dragged too into the weeds because it's such a sort of speculative term. Can you get a better player than Kyogo? But we have this conversation fairly regularly on the podcast, and quite often we do come up with better players than the ones we had. We will struggle to replace. It's been a conversation we've had on this podcast. But if you wind the clock back, if we had Dembele whilst he was at Celtic and you transplanted him into Ange's team, would he have scored some of the chances that Kyogo missed? Would he have been better? Probably. I think probably. Edward, probably. It's quite a difficult thing to sort of quantify, Stephen. But I think you can't just. I think it's. You can't just say we're never going to get a better player than Kyogo. You can't really say that.
But then again, like you mentioned, Dembele. Yes, he did get goals in the Champions League. Fair enough. I think he's the best striker we've seen since Larsson up till now. So if we had him, yes. But if Real Madrid had Ronaldo at his peak, they'd have pumped his 5-0. So how do you're stuck with the team you've got? And look, guys like Edward, if you bring him up, right, fine. But didn't he get Celtic into the Champions League?
No, I'm just saying that the notion that this is the best it's ever going to be is one that I don't necessarily agree with, and I think sometimes Celtic can surprise you by plucking good players out that that might do a job for them.
I don't really know where we're going with this conversation.
That's what I mean. It's difficult to quantify.
Because we all sat here 3-4 weeks ago and said Kyogo was beyond doubt the best we've had since Larsson, and now because he's not done it in the Champions League, we're saying, well, could we get a better player than him?
But you don't know how he's going to play in the Champions League until he plays in the Champions League. So then how do we know the next guy is going to be good in the Champions League?
That's my point. I don't know if we can say we can just go and get a better player than Kyogo. A guy we all agreed was, at least if we ease off that a wee bit, at least in the conversation for the best players that we've had.
He's definitely in the conversation for sure, yeah.
So how do we go out and get a better player than that? I don't know. On the learning on the job thing, I think a lot of people take the view that it's going to be like a 3-4 year project getting into or qualifying for the Champions League. Again, not how it works, because if we talk about if our main players are Kyogo and Jota and Carter Vickers and all that, then they're not going to be here in 3 or 4 years. No. There's not a chance. There's a very strong chance that we'll sell one of those in the summer coming, depending on what happens, depending on offers, of course. I'm not trying to chase the guys out the door, but there's a very strong chance Jota will be gone in the next year, 18 months. So that's not how it works. We can't keep a team together for the hope of 3 or 4 years worth of Champions League. What we hope as a club is to be able to consistently qualify for it. And then we can look into bettering the infrastructure at the club, because that's a difference between these clubs as well. Red Bull have got everything in place to make them a successful Champions League club. With that comes enormous investment, of course, right? But Celtic can do something along those lines. They can better the club as a result of continuous or consistent Champions League qualification. We should have had it all along. We should have done better in that regard, of course. But the idea that we're going to keep a team and manager together for 3 or 4 years in the Champions League is simply not going to happen. I'm not being pessimistic about that. It just won't happen. It's not how it works for a club like us, and very few clubs can. But how many, and across the Champions League, how many teams could you necessarily point at and say they've had the same manager and same core players for 3-4 years in a row?
Anymore.
The absolute top, Real Madrid have had the same team for years.
The semi-finals,
Bayern maybe the last team to kind of do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being mostly rhetorical. There will be teams that have kept a spine of players this whole time, but it's not going to. We are a pot 4 team.
Yeah.
I don't like saying that because it kind of makes us, kind of diminishes us in some way, but in many ways it sort of it emphasises the achievement and taking the game to these teams. I know we've not necessarily got the points that deserved, but we are a pot 4 team. We're not going to keep the players together to mount a serious challenge at the Champions League anytime soon. So what we need to do is sort of develop on it as a club and not look at it. But see when Hatate's had 3 or 4 years at the Champions League, just taking him off the top of my head.
Yeah.
That's not how it's going to work for us at all.
It's a weird thing to say that you're sort of, well, I'm saying this, I'm not saying you're saying it, but you might agree, but it's a weird thing to say you're proud of the manager's approach, but you're disappointed with the outcome. But that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I think we've done exactly the right thing. I think some of the games didn't go our way. Obviously, there's still games to play, but who knows how they're going to end up with the Champions League.
Play the kids.
Yeah, play the kids, but we've got to go to Bernabeu. These. I mean, we wanted that.
Yeah,
who do you want before the game? We want to go to Real Madrid and Bernabeu. So who knows how the next couple of games are going to pan out? But I think it's fair to say that we're proud. We understand what the manager's trying to do. We're proud of what we're trying to achieve. Maybe a bit more quality in key areas would have seen us progress. And when I say a bit more quality, that can be the existing players stepping up their game a wee bit, or it can be maybe next season. Because I think this will definitely feed into where Ange wants to take the club, not just behind the scenes, but recruitment next year. The conversations have already started. Look, if you want to make an assault in the Champions League, I'm going to need maybe another striker. For talking sake, I'm going to need maybe another right winger, and this is what I need you to go out and get me. And I saw a story the other day to see Celtic are bringing in a new scout to help with this. So
I think that's been poo-pooed already.
Oh, has it been poo-pooed already? So well, it's not like some Celtic websites to make up absolute nonsense. So I think this will feed into everywhere we want to take the club, and it's going to be a learning curve, not just for the players but for the staff, the management, behind the scenes. This is going to teach Celtic where they need to be.
Yeah, and I think now Celtic are in a good position because we've seen last season the amount of bodies we had to bring in, and even this season, if I'm looking at the Celtic squad right now coming into January, I can maybe only pick one position I'd want to strengthen. If we can get to next summer and just go, right, we need 2 free max players in, and I think that's where Ange will go, give me these 2 big hitters, and then we can see the progress. I think that's where we'll make progress.